Welcome into Hardcore Penn State Football. We are back from the bye week, and we have Donnie Collins on the show to help us get through these difficult times. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll be live in just 1 second. Please make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening. Welcome into Hardcore Penn State Football. I'm Corey Listoki. With me, not always, but tonight, Donnie Collins. Welcome to the show, Donnie.
How are you doing, Corey?
Doing great. Appreciate you coming on last minute. Shawn is about to be a father. Pretty much, the next episode we have, he very well could be a father. So appreciate you hopping on last second and keeping the show alive.
Yeah, congratulations to Shawn too. It's a big moment. I 13 years ago now. Yeah, for me. So I know what he's going through, and a lot of people out there obviously do. And congratulations. It's a big moment. I'm happy for him.
Yeah,
excited.
There's at least he has. There's something good happening in his life when a lot of things are not fun right now, especially related to our show. I was just saying before we hopped on and went live. He said, "Hey, we're expecting her to potentially be induced tomorrow," and I was like, "So are you going to be able to record or not?" And then he's like, "Yeah, no, I got some things going on." So, Donnie's filling in. Unfortunately, Donnie, Penn State's coming off a bye week, and believe it or not, it's Ohio State week. Penn State plays the Buckeyes on Saturday.
Yeah, I was telling you earlier, this is the week that it feels like this is a season that's completely lost, and just in the sense that this should be the biggest week of the year. This has been circled since the schedule come out, and whenever that was, and this was supposed to be a number 1 versus number 2 matchup. This is supposed to be Penn State showing it could beat a Big Ten team, the best Big Ten program on the road, on the way to a national championship. And to think that they're sitting here trying to stave off a 5-game losing streak now with relatively no hope of winning the game. I mean, with a backup quarterback out there just trying to get his feet wet, with a running game that outside of Katron Allen is in shambles, with no passing game, with a defense that can't stop the run. It's just an amazing turnaround. And I think there's some sort of irony here that in this season that started with so much hope, there's no hope in the biggest game. It's amazing that this has fallen so fast.
Just the last little note with Shawn. I remember, we were talking in the spring, not too long after he announced that, they were going to be having a child. And he goes, when that kid's born, he goes, Penn State could be number 1 in the country. And they could be looking at to be, either have just beaten Ohio State or about to play Ohio State and looking to be, a massive game. And thinking back to the spring to now, it's like, yeah, no, it's not fun. I told you before we hopped on the show, like the hardest part to me about this season is this exact kind of thing where we're about to play Ohio State, and yet it feels sort of like the off season. It sort of feels like none of this matters in the grand, like this is almost as important as the blue and white game. Is kind of the vibe that's coming around right now.
Yeah, perhaps even a little less. It's strange. It's just maybe the strangest game I think I could ever remember being around with Penn State. Maybe going back to that Nebraska game in 2011, which was coincidentally the year my wife was pregnant with my son. So yeah, Shawn and I have not had good luck with Penn State the years that we were waiting children.
So the last time Penn State was this big of an underdog was Wisconsin in 2013. They were, I believe, an 18-ish point underdog at Ohio State in 2019, which obviously, that game, they didn't have much hope either, just mostly due to injuries. But, I mean, Ohio State has done remarkably well against Penn State in the shoe. 2 wins are for the Nittany Lions, and one of those wins coming in 2011 when, again, nobody really knew what to think of that Tom Bradley led team. Bill Belton and who was the other guy that ran the Wildcat with them. It was Bill Belton ran some of it. Obviously, Stephon Green was a part of it, but then there's the defensive back that punched Matt McGloin. Helped
Curtis
out a little
Drake.
bit.
Yeah,
was it Curtis Drake?
Yeah.
They came out and ran all over the Buckeyes. Now, that was a Luke Fickell-led Buckeyes team that also wasn't great. This Ohio State team, Donnie, is probably, one of the better teams Penn State has ever faced. I mean, this is not only the number one team in the country, but they look impenetrable right now.
Yeah, they're very good. They're as solid as you could be, top to bottom. I still don't. I think you could beat them if you could. Obviously, this is the stupidest thing over here, but if you could outscore them, you'll beat them. But they're hard to score on. So they're just excellent defensively. Caleb Downs to me is the best player in the country. He allows them to do so much, to be so creative defensively. They haven't missed Jim Knowles even a little bit. That's the one thing, you look at Penn State and it's all collapsed, but everything that could have gone right for Ohio State coming into this season, everything could have gone wrong, for Ohio State coming into the season has gone right. So, and I think that's tells you a little bit of story about the difference in building programs right there. I mean, Ohio State's been recruiting at such a high level, has such a system in there. They've been as deep as you could possibly be, competitive as you could possibly be in practice for decades now. And they're kind of impenetrable to all these questions that come into the season. Even in a season where Penn State had so few questions, they couldn't overcome a couple of issues there, right that they suffered right at the beginning of the year. And really, Ohio State's a team that always believes it could win. And you see, even when Penn State's loaded talent-wise, they just didn't believe it. I'm convinced we've heard the stories out of the locker room that they never believed they were as good as everybody believed they could be. So yeah, and that's where they ended up coming into this season. But Ohio State is, played the way people thought Penn State would. They've been super efficient offensively. They've been defensively they've played like an experienced unit. Their playmakers have been playmakers, and it just has worked out for them in ways that didn't work out for Penn State. And here you go with 3 touchdown underdogs in a game that was supposed to be one of the biggest of the year.
Yeah, we kind of flipped exactly what I thought we're going to be for this episode, but that's totally fine. Let's stick with Ohio State. We'll get to the coaching search a little bit later on in the episode, but I think that's what I'm most frustrated with, Donnie, is like Ohio State just seems to hit on the quarterback every time. It just, and I know they have an amazing group around them all the time, but I was watching that Wisconsin game. I guess that technically would have been 2 weeks ago now. And that just the opening drive, and Julian saying, I think they threw the ball 8 times and he was 8 for 8 for like 54 yards and a touchdown. And you're just like, look, I get that he has amazing offensive line. He has an amazing running game. He has an amazing group of receivers, but he already looks the part already. And it's just time and time again, that seems to be the case. And look, you can say what you want about the rest of that program, because you're right, because they are truly reloading now. Like, I think a lot of people want to say that Penn State still has to rebuild after they lose a lot. They're going to have to do that next year. Ohio State's reloading. But regardless of that, if you just look at quarterback play between the two programs, that to me is what has really been the difference. If Penn State could have had 1 or 2 better quarterbacks, say over the last 2 decades, could be very different as far as some of these games that have come down to the final possession. And it just seems like Penn State's always on the wrong side of that.
Yeah, I think a part of that is what I touched on with the being able to be competitive in practices. And you look at the quarterbacks Penn State's had, and I think they're talented guys. Drew is certainly a talented guy. McSorley was a talented guy with plenty of intangibles. You can go down the list. Mike Robinson was a versatile player back in the day, and Darryl Clark, and we can go on and on with any of them. They're all clear starters. There was no backup who was ever really challenging any of those guys. And you look at Ohio State, and who does Sayin play behind last year? Will Howard. Will Howard's an NFL quarterback. He's in Steelers camp. He's on the IR right now, but he's playing. He's an NFL guy, and they had Aaron Noland, who was a a 4 or 5-star quarterback with him in his class. And, Sayin was a 5-star kid himself, goes to Alabama, ends up transferring into Ohio State. And the point I'm trying to make is, even when you go back to, 13 or 14, when they won the national championship, and they won it with whichever quarterback was there was the backup because they lost JT Barrett, and they lose a quarterback, they have somebody else right there with them. And that doesn't just help on game day. That helps in practice. And you're constant, the constant competition and look, I got to get better in this way, or I'm never going to play over this guy. It's humongous, and Penn State doesn't really have that, and never really has. I mean, I guess you're going to say, if you want to play devil's advocate, well, they had Perbula with Drew, but they were always kind of treated as two kind of separate players playing two separate kind of positions. And even when they both got into games, they were doing two different kinds of things. What they need to do is get a system at Penn State, like they have at Ohio State, bring in a bunch of guys who could play the system, especially at the skill positions, and let them go at it. And I think that's another step, another level Penn State has to get to. But you look at Ohio State, and Julian Sayin goes in there, and it's not really surprising that he's good, but I think it's kind of surprising that he's this good in his first season as a starter. And he's granted, he's 5-star kid, but unfortunately, I think Penn State fans can attest to this, 5-star kids don't always work out in the system. They still need the kind of help around them. They still need the kind of development that some kids don't get, but they always get it at Ohio State because they have a professional system there. And Julian Sayin goes in there and looks like an NFL quarterback immediately. And that's what he's going to be someday. But right now, to look at, if you stood him and Drew Aller side by side, I think you might take Aller. You might look at him in practice and say, well, Drew could do this better than this kid. Drew could do that better than this kid. But on the field during the games, it's always the Ohio State guy. It's always they're always the better player.
You mean that the Paul Jones Kevin Newsom quarterback battle wasn't a competitive battle back in the day,
or the Bolden McGloin, or Bolden Paul Jones McGloin, all those guys. Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. And you can put all the star ratings you want on these guys, but and compare them that way, but you got to be able to play. And look, Aaron Nolan immediately leaves because he knows he's not going to play there, and he goes to a really good program, and he looks like he's in line to be a good player there. But that's what Ohio State does. And you know how they're going to replace Aaron Nolan or the 5-star who transfers? They're going to get the next guy. They're just going to find him. That they recruit nationally. And kids want to play in that system, and they want to go there and find out if they can do it. And it's kind of like New York. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. That's what Columbus is in college football. And
I want to go back to your point there about the system, though, because I think that is one thing that you could also go back and say, like, when we start, and we'll have plenty of time to dissect the downfall of the Franklin program, but over the course of the next year, basically. But one thing that I always think maybe Franklin couldn't even figure out what he wanted to do was Franklin always seemed like he wanted the Bo Perbula type, the Trace McSorley type kind of guy, right? But then he seemed to almost be okay then, or feel like he was handcuffed to use the 5-star guy because they have the 5-star guy. And so, or like, if you wanted that system, why were you then okay? And why did you get rid of Kirk Shiraka immediately to go get a guy like Mike Yursich, so that then wanted to bring in a quarterback that didn't fit what you want to do, regardless of, if the Bo Perbula is the answer, that style, or if the Drew Aller is the answer, forget about that for a second. If you fundamentally have a way of what you want your quarterbacks to play, then why would you go get an offensive coordinator, Mike Yursich, that doesn't necessarily want to do that? And then maybe you correct it. Maybe you learn from that. You bring in Andy Kotelnicki. He's a little bit more towards what you kind of want to do. But Donnie, I've asked this question to Shawn, and this is what I think a Ryan Day would have done, and some of the other elite coaches around the country would have done, is they would have brought in Andy Kotelnicki, and he would have said, Drew, I think you're a great quarterback. You don't fit this system. think it's best if you hit the portal. You might be better than Bo Prabula, but you don't fit what we want to do. And it would be better for everybody if you went and found somewhere else because you were a Mike Yurcich guy. You're not an Andy Kotelnicki guy. But he almost like handcuffed himself, whether it was loyalty, whether it was, well, I think he can run enough, or he was just like, I can't waste 5-star potential because of maybe the storylines behind what that would look like. But Donnie, why did he handcuff himself? Why did he put himself in that position where, to your point, we never had that consistency of, a quarterback factory or regardless of the OC, I'm going to run the exact same system and we're going to figure it out. We never had an identity. We never had that consistency where recruits would know what to expect if you wanted to play quarterback at Penn State.
That's the $48 million question. It is. And yeah, I just pulled that number out of thin air. But I think there's a lot that you kind of touched on that it really is. And one of them is, to me, and I've thought a lot about this, it comes down to the perception issue to me. What do you want to tell the 5-star quarterback who you worked hard to bring in, thanks, but no thanks? We're going in a different direction. We want to play a totally different offense that you can't play. Do you go and do that? I think if you're Ohio State, you can do that. You can say, look, sorry, this is what we do. You're a great player. You're a great kid. You don't fit exactly what we do. So we'd like for you to go and get another opportunity somewhere else. But Ohio State could do that because they can get the 5-star kids. For Penn State, it's a little different. The 5-star quarterback doesn't go to Penn State. You get the kind of the watered down 4-star kid who
Shawn Clifford's, with all due respect.
Clifford, and I'm not knocking Shawn. He was a fine player for Penn State. That's what Shawn Clifford was, a fine, productive player. You're going to go down in history as a better, more productive player than Drew was. But I still think Drew is a better physical specimen. He's got a better arm, all that stuff. But I can tell you that where Ohio State's getting a 5-star every couple of years at that position, Penn State's getting one every decade, maybe. So you have to cash in on that kid, and you have to. There is a perception issue there too, that you have to be able to develop that kid, or you can't develop quarterbacks. I don't think there's any question with the way they hired the offensive coordinators, the last two. That style of quarterback that they needed in those systems was Bo Prabula. Now, I don't know if Bo Prabula is the answer. I think it's probably more like Lenora Sellers or somebody like that, who you really want. That's kind of the ideal fit for what you're doing. But you have a guy like Prabula who fits better than a guy like Aller. Well, at that point, what do you do? Do you tell Drew to walk so Bo Prabula could play? I don't know if that looks great. I think that puts a spotlight on you that you don't want. And I also don't think there were times that Drew was clearly the inferior player there. I thought he kind of adjusted to the system that really wasn't suited to his style. I think he adjusted well enough at times. He got into the national semifinal. Now, did he play extremely well in the big games, and was he consistent in the biggest games? No, he was not. But he did what they asked him to do, and he was willing to do it. And I think if that's what he wants to do, then you give that kind of kid the chance to do it. But it does come back to the question: is if he doesn't do well what you really want to do, why do you even recruit that guy? And you go back to the time when he was recruiting. Well, who was the offensive coordinator? It was Kirk Shiraka, who runs a system that Drew would have been perfect in. So it comes, like I said, it comes down to a lot of issues here. But the big issue is when you swing and miss at a potential home run higher, they throw a fastball down the middle, 3-2, and you swing and miss at it and you strike out, and they struck out with Yurcich, then it sets you back. And there's a certain amount of dealings there that you have to deal with yourself if you're James Franklin. And I think one of the questions that he never really answered was, what is my philosophy on offense? What do I want to be? What do I want this team to be? I'm built to play action pass, run the ball between the tackles, and grind out the clock, run 50 plays a game, win games 28-14 with the defense I have, and will be a successful team that way. But they didn't play that way. So you either played the right way with the wrong quarterback, or you played the wrong way with the right quarterback. And I don't know if we're ever going to have the answer to that, because James isn't going to answer it, and Drew's not going to answer it. And it's all speculation at this point. But yeah, I think when you look at what Penn State became this year, it's very clear that their system that wasn't as defined as what an Ohio State does. And it came back to bite them, because they had an offensive coordinator, was a perfectly good offensive coordinator with the personnel to run somebody else's offense. And they really banked on that 22 class there to kind of carry this program for 4 years, and they just didn't have enough. And they didn't have enough versatility at that position that's so critical.
Let's get back to Ohio State. There's one other thing I want to talk about before we move on from Ohio State. Obviously, we'll have another Ohio State episode before the end of the week, but I want to talk about the elephant in the room, which is Jim Knowles heading back to Columbus. Matt Patricia's obviously done a very good job there. The NFL defense, no problems. It's the best defense in the country now at Ohio State. But also, Ryan Day gets an opportunity to potentially put up as many points as possible against a Jim Knowles defense that I don't want to say is limping into the game, but and they played better at times against Iowa, but still can't stop the run, and still doesn't have the linebackers to compete with this Ohio State offense.
Yeah, and I know an old coach he said, if you can't stop the run, you can't win games. And Penn State can't stop the run. And I think, and this is one of my things where I'm looking back in January, April, just kind of counting down to this season and thinking, where were we wrong? What did we not see? And I think it was on the defense, that side of the ball. Jim Knowles runs a really great system that has worked everywhere he's ever been. And I think if he stays at Penn State, and I think there's a possibility that happens maybe, but I think if he stays at Penn State, he will build the kind of defense that could win games, certainly win the Big Ten, maybe even win, get them where they want to go. But personnel wise, this team didn't have that. And you look at the defensive line, they're not huge on the edge. They aren't as disruptive on the edge as they've been in the past. So I think certainly Dennis-Sutton at times has been pretty good. They haven't been as devastating off the edge as they've been in the past, but their big problem is up the middle. And once Tony Rojas got hurt, the season was over. And Rojas, interesting. He's a good player, very good player. But you can't be a championship contender if you lose Tony Rojas and you can't recover from it. So, and this team has not. They're just not a team that is big enough, stout enough to stop the run, and especially when Amari Campbell's getting schemed against now. You're going to run away from the guy. So they haven't tackled well enough there. They haven't been strong enough there. Up the middle of the two defensive tackle spots is never really pushing the pile back and enabling those linebackers, as limited as they are there now, to get into the backfield and make plays. So it's a bad combination. And Ohio State, statistically, I don't know if this is their best rushing attack they've ever had, but it's certainly good enough to overcome what Penn State's going to throw at them this week. And they're going to have to, Terry Smith could talk about playing hard all he wants and playing hard and being tenacious, but tenacious only gets you so far. You got to be really, really talented against Ohio State. And that's where they're not talented. It's something Bob Shoop and I used to talk about. Every time I talked to Bob Shoop when he was the defensive coordinator, he'd say it's a baseball thing. You got to be, if you're good up the middle, you could win games. This team's not good up the middle. They're good once you get to Zakee Wheatley, and that's just not, it's not happening. That's too late. It's too late to stop the run right there.
Yeah, we spoke about it a little bit last week, but I think one thing that is not discussed enough was the loss of Jameel Lyons and Kavion Keys, obviously for good reason. But Jameel Lyons, I very early on was like, he's going to be the next first round pick for Penn State at the position. Like he was what you just said, right? He was a little bit meatier, could hold the edge, and was also disruptive. And they don't have enough of those guys. I think the disruption, that the lack of havoc, Donnie, is what really upsets me. I spoke about this too, but right now they're on pace to average less than half the number of TFLs per game than of last year, which is just insane. Like at that point, it's not a scheme thing. It's you really don't have enough guys to just wreak havoc, and then they constantly stay on schedule. I mean, the Iowa game, Donnie, even the Iowa game, if Iowa just keeps running the football and stops trying to throw it, they win this game very comfortably. They don't try a 66-yard field goal. They win this game very comfortably. Like the game was close, and I give Penn State and Terry Smith credit for fighting to the very end. But if Iowa was a little bit more competent, they could have ran this game into the ground, and it could have been, I don't know, call it a 21-10 game, and it wouldn't have felt that close.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I really thought that game was I thought it was a shining moment actually for Terry because I thought he really outcoached Ferentz and his staff. But you're right. I mean, you run all, there's no reason to throw the ball against Penn State. There just isn't. They can't stop the run. They can't stop the quarterback from running the ball. They certainly can't stop the quarterback from running the ball. But they can't stop power plays. They can't stop anything to the outside. They're just not very good stopping the run. And yeah, it's part of it is that there's no threat in the backfield ever from the defensive side. And like, and I think that's where the perception, where we coming into the season thinking this could be a dominant defense was wrong. We take a closer look. There was no chance this was going to be a dominant defense. They didn't have Abdul Carter. They didn't, Chop Robinson a couple of years ago. He was really good against the run. Abdul was good against the run, and Denai's good against the run, but he's not. He's just not that kind of a player. He's an NFL defensive end. He's a good one, but he's a decent Isaac. He's not those guys who are just, you have to scheme against them to the point where where they're going to run. It's just one of those things where they just didn't have enough at key positions where they needed to have somebody. And the shame of it is Campbell's been good. So they hit a home run on that transfer, but nobody else really stepped up their game. I think Durant's kind of been mediocre at best this year. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned a couple of reasons why they're Keys and Lions, the Voldemorts of this team, this program. You can't mention their names, but yeah, you have those two guys. And I've heard a lot of Chaz Coleman could be the next Lions, but Chaz Coleman's a freshman. He's got a lot of growing to do. And this would have been a year that guy would have been a major player for them. And no, he's not. So, and part of me thinks, well, that happens, and that's that. But yeah, I'm sure Penn State was thinking that after Abdul Carter, we'd have that guy along with Denai, and they'd be really good. And it didn't work out that way. But they never replaced that potential production there. And yeah, they have nothing off the edge with any kind of consistency to get to the quarterbacks, and I think that's a big problem. That's as big a problem as stopping the run as they can't contain a quarterback.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about the press conference today. There was a couple things of note. Yes, Terry Smith continues to say all the right things, the best he can. Did say that they would get Zariah Fisher back, so that's a good sign there. As I think Zariah Fisher has played about as good as you can ask for a guy who's gone through the ringers from an injury perspective. Also, they expect to have Vega Ione back as well. So seems like they're relatively getting healthier, which is good. No update from Jackson Smolik. But one thing that I thought was interesting that I really wanted to talk to you about today, Donnie, they were asked about the 2-quarterback system. And I believe Andy Kotelnicki was also asked about it. If not this week, but early last week, and didn't necessarily, regardless of Jackson Smolik was healthy, didn't necessarily kind of say that they would stop doing it. And Terry Smith today kind of relatively doubled down and said, like, they think there's value to it, and they thought it worked at times. And it looks like Jackson Smolik is probably not going to play, at least at Ohio State, if not the rest of the season. I mean, he looked like he was really banged up there. But does that mean that they could potentially have Jack Lambert out there, Beckham Kritza going out there? I mean, if they're dedicated to this 2-quarterback set, Donnie, I mean, what are we? Let me just wrap up before I ask you this question. I said something a little speculative and dark last week that I thought Andy Kotelnicki put Jackson Smolik out there because he was disposable, because he couldn't afford to run Ethan Grunkmeyer 15 times and get pounded, because he also still needed to throw the football. But to a lesser extent, they needed somebody to run the ball so the linebackers couldn't cue in on Katron Allen the entire time. And Jackson Smolik drew the shortest stick to have to do that against the Iowa defense. And as dark as that sounds, it relatively kind of worked, because Jackson Smolik was the one that got banged up, not Ethan Grunkmeyer. And so, again, I ask, like, going into Ohio State, where everyone's going to be focused on Katron Allen, and you might need to somehow make those linebackers think twice, and you don't want Ethan Grunkmeyer doing all the running, are they going to throw Jack Lambert out there? Are they going to throw Beckham Kritz out there? Because Grunkmeyer isn't that much worse of a runner. It's not like it's Bo Prabila and Drew Aller out there. They're about the same. They were getting more out of Smolik running the ball than Grunkmeyer running the ball. I can't figure out any other reason for why Smolik went out there. And if they were willing to do it with Smolik, are they going to be willing to do it with Lambert or with Kritza as well?
That game was the first time I had heard a sniff that they liked Smolik as a runner.
Right.
Yeah, I thought that too. I thought that it's you have to have two quarterbacks. This is important to have two quarterbacks, and you might as well get them both in there. And that's kind of how I took it. Then you see the usage, and
never let them throw it.
You never let them throw it. So yeah, do I think we're going to see Jack Lambert? I do not, but I think we'll see somebody taking snaps that isn't a quarterback. That isn't Grunkemeyer, because it doesn't make sense to, if he gets hurt, who plays? Someone's got to go in and play the game. So who's the backup? If Smolik's out, and I think he is, I think we're both reading that the right way.
I don't understand, Donnie. If you're not going to run Smolik, or excuse me, if you're not going to let him throw it, because I think, okay, for the first two series they caught Iowa off guard. I would give Terry Smith and Andy Kotelnicki credit. Like, that was a cool wrinkle for a little bit, but very quickly they realized that Smolik wasn't going to throw the ball. So at that point, if you go in saying, Smolik, you are not going to throw the football, and I guess we don't know for sure. Maybe they did call an RPO and he chose to. But if he doesn't throw the football, at that point, why even use Smolik? Why not use Kobe Howard? Why not use somebody else that actually is a threat to pick up more than 3 yards if you're not going to worry about throwing the football at that point? So I agree with you. I think maybe it won't be a quarterback this time, but I think it's a great opportunity to get a younger guy in the game. But it just, that part didn't make sense to me. If they're not going to throw it at all anyway, some of those plays, if it wasn't Smolik, might have actually gone for a massive gain if it was a true athlete back there.
Yeah, Tommy Stevens or Trace or somebody like that. Yeah, I agree. There was, I didn't think, I thought it was weird that he was the guy doing that, but I don't have no inside information on this, but I would expect Singleton would do that. That you could have Singleton and Allen, and it makes schematic sense. It makes strategic sense to do it that way. But yeah, you can't run, if you're going to put Lambert out there. That's malpractice. You can't put that kid or Kritza or one of those guys who's never played a game and put him in the horseshoe. It doesn't make any sense to me to do that. But it didn't make any sense.
I can't wait to clip what you just said. I'm gonna clip what you just said on Sunday when we see Beckham Kritza go out there and fumble the football or something like that.
It could happen. Anything's possible in 2025.
But that part, to me, I would be curious to see if they do try to do something like that, Ohio State. I mean, I want to also get to Andy Kotelnicki, because, Donnie, I'm sure you saw, they finally got Andy Kotelnicki in an interview, and how do I put this? His lack of knowing the answer I think struck a chord with a lot of fans where, I mean, I don't blame him because obviously if he knew the answer, he would have it fixed. But it very much seemed like, and I kind of understand Penn State fans because I can't know how not to do my job. Or more importantly, if I don't know, or if I haven't solved the issue, at least I need to figure out what I need to do my job better. And I don't want to say it sounded defeated, but it kind of felt like, yeah, we've tried a bunch of things and they're not working. And Terry Smith today used the word humbled, and I think that's probably the best way to put it. They've all been humbled in the offensive side of things.
Yeah, I'll say it. They sounded defeated, and Terry's been the one shining light in this season. And you kind of, if anybody who didn't value Terry Smith before 2025 has to value what he can do and what he brings to this program now, I think he's going to be a part of the program for a long time still to come. But yeah, when Andy says I don't know, to me it sounds like, well, the plan didn't work. And we had no backup plan because why would we have a backup plan? Because what we had was going to work. And yeah, nothing went right. And sometimes when nothing goes right, well, not sometimes, all the time, when nothing's going right, it's the coach's job to figure out what works. And the fact that he has no earthly idea of how to adjust is, I think, signs his ticket out of town eventually. But yeah, I don't, as a layman, I don't know why it went as badly as it did, but I could look at the film and tell you why it's not working. They're not blocking well up front. The quarterback wasn't decisive. He was playing tentative. The star running back was not making anybody miss, one of the two star running backs anyway. And it really, at that point, they 44 being gone is a big problem for this offense, Tyler Warren. And then the receivers have not made big plays again. So at some point, you got to stop blaming the receivers for that, and you have to start asking why they're not making big plays. And I think you could ask Andy Kotelnicki that, and he'll say, I don't know. So yeah, I think there's an issue here, and that didn't get fixed. And the reason it didn't get fixed is because they didn't ever think it was going to be an issue and didn't consider that it could be. But I have heard from numerous people who were around them in the summer, who maybe saw some of the practices, things like that this should not have snuck up on Penn State. That the chinks in the armor were showing themselves a little bit. So how he could say, oh, we don't know how to fix it. It doesn't make it. There are some things they're doing okay. Just focus on those. Give 13 the ball 30 times. He'll take it.
Yeah, they tried that a little bit more. He got 28 against Iowa. The last thing, this has just turned into me just bashing Andy Kotelnicki, but I feel like there was some level of disrespect to the fans' IQ per se when he also spoke about the difficulties in passing the football and how you need to block well and you need to throw a good ball and then you have to catch the ball. It's like, yep, I very much understand how a passing play works. I fundamentally understand how that works. I also fundamentally know that there's like 100 teams currently better than Penn State at doing that. So we're not asking for them to come out looking like Ohio State, but I do think it's reasonable for them to come out and look better than Minnesota. And I feel like that the answer there also just came a little tone deaf, as if we're asking for the moon when really we're just asking for a telescope to look at the moon.
Yeah. Or some insight into why 100 other teams could do it and you can't. Why can Rutgers do this? Why can Cincinnati do this? Why can Maryland do this and you can't? Why can't you get it? Why? And it's not just a 2025 problem. It's a why can't you consistently get this? And even in 2024, when having that aspect of your game might get you to the national championship, and then who knows? So yeah, I think it is kind of coach speak in a way. I think coaches, although I certainly don't have any sympathy for Penn State's assistant coaches because they have to talk once a year. And when you don't have answers that one time, it's not a great sign. But to kind of say something like that is not really something that's treating fans, as you mentioned, like they're intelligent people and like they know what's going on and that they're paying as much attention to this as they are. I do think that that's really short-sighted. And I think it kind of speaks to part of the problem here is that he doesn't, you're at, in his mind, you're asking him to do something he knows they can't do. But, why can't you do it? Give me a reason. Why is your 5-star quarterback and your 3 guys that you paid a lot of money to out of the portal for the second straight year? Why isn't this not working? Why could Harrison Wallace be a good receiver at Ole Miss and not at Penn State? It doesn't make really any sense to treat fans that way, but they don't look at it as that's how they're treating the fans. They look at that, they're talking to the media that way, and the media watches the games. They should know these answers, and I'm convinced of that. But yeah, eventually that's going to come back and bite him. I think it's been a really rough year for Kotelnicki's career. I really think he's got
they were talking about, like, could we hold on to him after this year? And now it's like,
no,
where's he going to go after this year? I want to ask you something from like a media perspective. Before I do that, again, I just want to remind everyone that's watching live on YouTube, make sure you've liked the video. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed. A lot of you think you're subscribed and you're not. Just take 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed on the channel. But I want to ask you, in a season like this, as a reporter, when you have the opportunity to talk to the coaches, I guess, how do you handle I have the opportunity to absolutely just pile on. I have the opportunity to throw salt in the wound. I may know the answer to some of this, but I still have to ask those kind of questions. What goes through your mind? What are you looking to get out of them in a time like this? What do you try to focus on? And I know it might not be an easy question.
It's not, but I hate to bring this story up. This happened years ago. This was 2001. It was the Daytona 500, 2001, and our NASCAR writers in the office watching the race, and that's obviously the race that at the end they had the crash at the end, and Dale Earnhardt died. And one of our editors says to him, "Hey, could you make some calls to our local NASCAR people to get their reaction?" And he says, our reporter responds, "Well, what's he going to say at a time like this?" And the editor says, "Well, that's what I'd like to know." So I always, when I'm talking to coaches in the worst of times, I just ask direct questions like, why is this not working? I try not to focus on some of these questions that you hear, the long-term questions. I think if you try to say, look, why is this not working right now? I know it's worked in the past. Why is it not working right now? Right, especially with the offensive line, why are these 5 guys together who were so good for a couple of years now? What are defenses doing? And kind of ask these technical questions that the coaches feel like they are, I guess, uniquely positioned to answer. But I think that the media in times like these tend to go out there and say, well, we're looking big picture here. I'm going to try to look 10 weeks down the road, and coaches don't do that anyway. So that's where these issues come up, and that's why you get some of the answers you get. But yeah, I just try to focus on the task at hand, and sometimes it depends on the manager or in baseball, or the head coach in football, or the guys you're talking to all the time, and how they're kind of dealing with it. You see it day to day. You know how to deal with those guys.
Yeah. By the way, if you ever have a chance to go down to Daytona, the tour and all that is well worth it. By the way,
I've never been there. Yeah, never gone to Daytona.
Yeah, they let you go there and walk up the angle and everything. It's pretty cool. It's pretty neat. And I'm not by any means a NASCAR guy, but I don't think you have to be to appreciate that spot. Yeah, and I think, getting back to football, like that, we've had a lot of those kind of questions, right? A lot of big picture questions. Just to follow up on what you said about Terry Smith, like John Sauber asked today if Terry Smith would want to stay on the staff, and I thought he gave a really good answer. I always kind of go back to Larry Johnson Sr. and how he sort of was given an opportunity, but not really given an opportunity for the head coaching job. And there probably wasn't a way where they could have ever given it to him, but I still don't know if Penn State ever handled that exactly correctly. And obviously that didn't help that he went to Ohio State afterwards. So there is some of that they're going to have to navigate. Obviously, you talk about Jim Knowles and what he could theoretically bring to the table. It'd be nice if Penn State didn't have to shell out another big buyout, but maybe that's a good transition, Donnie, to the coaching search. And I'm kind of glad we did it in the way we did it, because it at least felt like a somewhat normal episode, 40 minutes into this thing. But now we have to realize that Penn State still doesn't have a head coach and probably won't for another month or so at the very least. There's a couple names I want to throw by you, but before I do that, I'm just curious, where are you at with it? Are you kind of, what's your timeline, you think? And then if anybody was on the table, who would you like to see Penn State go snag?
You could hear me still, right? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, because my video's gone for some reason, but I'll keep talking. But yeah. If I could have anybody, I want Dan Lanning, but I can't have Dan Lanning. So that's my dream guy for the job. I think he fits the Penn State. I think he'd be good anywhere, but he's got a great job right now. So that's where I'd be. So what was your question again?
1 second, Donnie. Do me a favor, just refresh your browser for me.
Yeah, I'll refresh. Yeah,
and I think we'll be okay. That's not a problem.
This has never happened before.
Not a problem. Here, let me see if I can kick you out and bring you back in real quick.
All right, sounds good.
Nope, that didn't work either. All right, let me kick you out. All right, we'll get Donnie Collins back in a second. If you have questions for Donnie Collins about the head coaching serve, drop them in the chat. We'll make sure to get Donnie to answer those questions. And we'll be right back in a second. Mark, I saw you answered, or you had a question there about Quentin Martin. I don't know if he's banged up, but Quentin Martin did not make the trip to Iowa. So take that for what you will. Obviously, we haven't seen very much of him. And I think, again, is a perfect example of a guy where highly recruited, highly touted, and was meant to be kind of a big piece in what was going to hopefully change the complexion of this offense, and it hasn't happened. So it just kind of comes back to the same story over and over and over again, with guys just not panning out that are supposed to make a difference for one reason or another. And I think that really just kind of summarizes, Penn State as a whole. There is you need guys like Quentin Martin to do things, and Quentin Martin's a perfect example of somebody who, again, just was highly recruited, highly touted, and has not been able to make his mark yet on the season. Donnie, it looks like you're back.
I'm back. I don't know where I went.
I don't know. You were still kind of here. I mean, we still had your video, but you didn't have your video.
Yeah, I had no video, and I was getting pop-ups, and it was not great.
Yeah, no, that's not a problem. The beautiful thing about the live people will be upset with this, but the people that listen on podcasts will have no idea this happened, which is always fun. Donnie, you said Dan Lanning. Yeah, not realistic.
No.
What are other names that you're hearing? I have a couple, but I want to maybe get your impression of, like, realistically, if you could throw out names, who should we know as of right now? There was a flurry of names within the first 2 weeks. I think that's starting to settle out now a little bit more into maybe some realistic contenders.
Yeah, I think all the names you're hearing are probably names that somebody from some section of Penn State or has thrown out there, and everyone from Urban to Drinkwitz to Manny, all those guys that you've heard, they're probably being considered to some degree by somebody. Now, I want to say two things here from what I've heard that I've from the people I trust. That number one, this is not going to be a quick process. This could be a longer kind of deal. And number two, this is going to be a Pat Kraft decision. So any input that comes from anybody else, it's only as good as Pat thinks the hire could potentially be. So that said, you hear a lot of the names. I've heard a surprising amount of Urban Meyer. I know for a fact he's at least talked to Pat Kraft. I know whether that's in a kind of a advisory way, that some people are trying to paint that as, but I don't think that's the case at all. I think there's some mutual interest there. So I think he's certainly in the mix. But other than that, I mean, it's basically which agent wants the name out there to be kind of associated. I think that's kind of what a Kalen DeBoer name is out there. That's kind of the feeling I get from him, is that he'd love for his name to be involved with several other jobs, and it will be. Marcus Freeman maybe the same way. He's not quote unquote denying it, but he said, I think he's going to stay at Notre Dame ultimately. Worth a swing if you're Pat Kraft and you want one of those guys. But I have a lot of thoughts on them individually. But I've from what I've been told by people I trust, the name that keeps coming up is Urban. Now, whether that ultimately comes to fruition, I don't know. But it makes some sense at this point to hear a lot of Urban, because if you're really looking at someone who's coaching right now, you can't go after those guys.
I want to get to that. Let's just go there first. Two things about Urban Meyer. Obviously, the biggest one is, besides who he might hit on at a bar. More importantly, though, he hasn't coached since 2018, 2019. He hasn't had to deal with NIL or this level of management. And I would argue, when Urban Meyer was at his best, and I would argue similar to why Nick Saban was so damn good, is he was so good when players had to be bought in and they had to do it his way, and he had quote unquote ownership over them. That's why he wasn't very good in the NFL. That's why he's been excellent as a college football coach. Does he have that same level of autonomy in 2025 where he can rally a program into being that and doing that? Does he have the same recruiting prowess that he once did, given that he's a little bit older? Those are just some of the first couple questions that I have. He'll put together an amazing staff. He'll put together, and he'll inject some immediate recruiting momentum for sure. But those two things, managing a program nowadays, and then as well as, can he continue to have it? If it's a marathon, not a sprint, will he be able to sustain that energy over the course of 1, 2, 3 years?
Yeah, I think Urban, if he's your guy, and I'm not super convinced, but if he's your guy, then you have to plan on a 3 or 4 year plan, in that range, because he flames out quick, and that's just kind of the style he is. He puts everything into it and then he goes. So he'd be the guy to bring in, not to build your program, but to win a national championship really quick. Now, the question I think you're kind of getting at is that the same process as it was when he last coached at Ohio State? And I don't think so. It's a very different game now. It's NIL is such a big part of it, which I think he'd be good at, but so is, making sure everybody's playing. The transfer portal is a big deal. You don't have to stick around and sit behind 3 talented kids because Urban Meyer is the coach and he recruited you and says you have to do it. Now you can go find your own opportunity. So I think it's a different game for him than he's used to. And it's more the game that he had in the NFL that he didn't do well with. And out super quick. So I would be very cautious about that. And just because he's won a couple of national championships, to me, doesn't mean he's the guy who's going to get Penn State there. But I'm not making the hire.
Does it have to be a coach with previous head coach experience?
I don't know. I've heard that that's the preference. Yeah, could it be a Brian Hartline? Could it be like Will Stein, someone like that? The way I think there's an interesting kind of dichotomy here that Pat Kraft has put himself in, where you're doubling down on national championship. You're standing behind the altar there at the press conference, and you're not letting the national championship hopes die. You're just national championship. Well, you got to then go and get a guy who people think can win a national championship. Well, I don't know that Will Stein or Hartline could go in and win a national championship. I don't know what kind of head coach they are, but I know that the teams recently that have been winning national championships have been doing it with head coaches who they hired for the first time and who've had a chance to build programs. The Ryan Days, Dabo, I guess to a certain extent,
Kirby Smart.
Kirby Smart, yeah, he won a national championship before, but yeah, I think that's kind of there's no correlation between going out and getting, just bringing in Jimbo Fisher because he's done it before and now saying, well, he can do it again. I think you go out and you find the right guy, but you also have to sell that guy the right way to the fan base and get them convinced, because you also have this big stadium project going on and tickets to sell and all that. And you fired a perfectly good, successful head coach to get to another level. And you're going to bring in a guy who wasn't a head coach. My gut feeling on this, and from what I'm told, is that this will be a guy with head coaching experience, but I don't necessarily think it has to be. It's got to be the right fit. It's got to be somebody who's going to come in and give you what James did, the good parts of that, while changing some of the parts that James never got you. And there are guys out there, but I'm not sure there's guys who fit that bill perfectly with the name brand recognition that I think Pat Kraft is shooting for early.
It's funny to me talking about like getting the fan base behind it. I feel like if you had to, if you have a guy like Rule and a guy like Meyer, the same portion of the fan base that would love Rule would hate Meyer, and the other portion that would love Meyer would hate Rule. And it's just like that group right there, like both those potential hires are very polarizing for complete opposite reasons.
Yeah. And the other thing I hear a lot that's funny to me is, it could be an up and comer. It doesn't have to be someone it doesn't have to be a name brand guy. It doesn't have to be an Urban Meyer who he's a dirtbag, whatever. But then you bring up Rule and the response is, well, he's James Franklin again. So to me, it's all about fit. I can make a good case that Matt Rule should be the coach. And I will sit here and tell you, I'll believe that Matt Rule won't be the next coach when I see the press conference with somebody else sitting there. I still think Rule is the favorite, but there's kind of a double standard with everybody. Like, oh, we'll take Will Stein because he's an up and comer, but we don't have any proof he's going to be better than James. But we know that we don't have any proof that Matt Rule won't be, and it's kind of just it's basically whoever you're talking to, a million different people, a million different fans, and they all want somebody different. They all have different kind of hopes. So that's really where it's falling right now. But there's, I do want to stress early stages here. They are not. I don't even get the sense that there's a rush to save the 2026 recruiting class. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, and I wanted to get to that, but before I do, you talk about perfect fit. To me, someone that would be the perfect fit, I don't think it's probably going to happen because obviously Texas A&M is doing very well right now. But if there's even a little bit of smoke, Mike Elko is my number one choice. If they seriously had an opportunity to get Mike Elko, I think he'd be I don't know if anybody matches better with Pat Kraft than Mike Elko. From a tenacity, from the way he wants to play football, to showing that he can build programs, did it at Duke, to showing that he can handle a lot of money and handle it well, like A&M. He's done that. He turned A&M around, which is it was not just a dumpster fire from a win and loss perspective, but from what Jimbo Fisher left in the locker room, he turned that around in the hardest conference in college football. And so I think he checks all of those boxes. Now, I also am realistic in the sense that A&M literally might win a national championship this year. But if that is a name that if for some reason he wanted to, come back north and he didn't necessarily want to be in the SEC long term, or he's doing it now, but it isn't a healthy relationship. If there was some possible way that they could get Mike Elko, I think he fits all of the boxes perfectly. Like to me, you don't have, I don't have any sort of like, ooh, that's a little bit of a risk. Here's a couple of reasons why. If Mike Elko came to Penn State and it didn't work, I would have no explanation for why it didn't work.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he's a solid choice all around. And he didn't just turn Texas A&M around. He turned him around quick. And that was a dumpster fire, as you said, and he got him going. So they're where they wanted to be 5 years ago. So yeah, I would get Elko in if I could, but and that's a matchup, right? That's a fit, but Texas A&M is a fit with the money. So, and I'm sure Penn State would be too. But if you're looking for $1 more to stay there, Texas A&M is going to give you the $1 more.
Yeah, it would have to be a non-money thing for why Elko would ever. But again, if all he cares about is winning national championships, he's on the doorstep right now potentially.
Yeah.
You mentioned the timeline. I agree with you. I think a lot of people are overthinking this. Oh, they need to have somebody by early signing day. And I'll reiterate a point I made a couple weeks ago. Who cares? Like, if you're telling me that this next hire has to be the hire and it has to be correct and you have to, I don't care if that person's playing in the national championship game. Like, or coaching, not playing, but you have to get the right guy. And if you have a chance to get a Mike Elko, I don't care if he's playing or coaching in January. Like, first of all, it's the early signing period, so you still might be able to get some guys or make them hold out until the later signing period. But in the world of the transfer portal, and if they leave, all those guys could theoretically recommit. Like, there's no reason to rush into this, or more importantly, cut half of your candidates off the list because you want somebody that can start, say, right after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I agree with that. If Marcus Freeman's your guy, you hire Marcus Freeman in January. If same with DeBoer, same with, I mean, if you want to go and offer Curt Cignetti $20 million a year, I'm sure he'll take it, and you can go get him in January. So I don't see the upshot of having anybody in there in December just to hold together a signing class when you have you have NIL money, you have the transfer portal, and you have to get down to a certain number on your roster anyway.
Right.
So I think this is the one. I think one of the real we didn't talk about the James firing, obviously, but one of the things I think strategically, why do you fire James when you do? You can because that recruiting class doesn't. I don't want to say it's not important, but it doesn't mean as much as it used to make sure that entire class comes in.
Absolutely. Donnie, we were just about an hour. I told you 45 minutes, so I'm a liar per usual. Any final thoughts before we get out of here today?
Yeah, I have a lot. we were already over the hour. Yeah, I just, I think we mentioned Terry Smith. I want to say I think that when you talk about the staff and who could come back in the future, like who from this staff is going to be expected to be on the next coach's staff. I mean, obviously Terry Smith. I think that'll be a very interesting thing moving forward, because you're going to have a coach who's going to come in and want to replace some guys, but you also have some guys that are Penn State guys, Howell, Dan Connor, guys like that who I think that they could conceivably stick around just because that could be part of the deal. So I think that's a real interesting part of the next coaching search is how much power the next guy gets to build an entire staff of people he's comfortable with. And I certainly think Penn State wants to keep Terry. And I think he's doing a good job in an interim basis in a very tough spot. But that's really the one thing I don't think people talk about enough.
Isn't, and I think today he called it he's like a substitute teacher at the moment or something like that.
Yeah.
He's like a substitute teacher for a middle school class, and he's having a very difficult task in front of him for sure.
He's dodging the spitballs.
That's right. Donnie, Scranton Times-Tribune, what do you got going on there? Where can people find you? All that good stuff.
At Penn State TT on Twitter. I'm working on getting my podcast running back up. Might be even by the end of the week. Who knows? I'll let people know. Yeah.
Definitely let us know. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't already, make sure you've liked the video and subscribed on YouTube. If you're listening, please make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening. Not exactly sure the plans for the rest of the week yet, but hopefully we have some good news from Mr. Shawn Kane maybe as early as tomorrow. So appreciate you, Donnie, for coming on last second, and wishing Shawn all the best as him and his family are hopefully going to have exciting news here soon.
Definitely. Big day.
Awesome. That's Donnie Collins. I'm Corey Listoki. You've been watching and listening to Hardcore Penn State Football. Until next time, see you later.